Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Tazzy Bolt.
I've always considered myself to be an adventurous person, someone that thinks outside of the box. And one day, I found myself in a room with about 20 strangers, and I saw people suspended by rope, and they looked happy. They were smiling, their shoulders were relaxed, and I remember looking at them and thinking, they look free, and I wanted to be that free. So, that night, I returned with the goal of being suspended by rope for the first time in my life. When I entered the room, I was handed a consent form, and it was part liability waiver, part checklist about how you wanted to be suspended that night. I sat down, started filling it out, and within a few minutes, a woman approached me, took the consent form, looked it over briefly, and then looked at me and said, "Okay, what's your relationship to pain?" To be honest, I didn't really think that pain was involved with this whole scenario, but what I can tell you is that pain's not really an issue for me, but the physical manifestation of pain on my body is bruises. So she looked slightly confused by that response, and I knew at that point that I would have to go into my story of bruises. It's not really a story that I had enjoyed telling. It goes something like this. Well, when I was 14 years old, I was diagnosed with a bleeding disorder called von Willebrand's disease. It means that I bruise easily, that I most likely will never get a heart attack or stroke in my life. It means that if I'm ever in a major car accident or I get an artery slashed, that I will bleed faster than the regular person. But fun fact, it's carried genetically on the woman's side of the family. So my mom has it, my grandma has it. My great-grandmother probably had it, but she lived to be 96 years old. So I'm not worried about it, but you'll see the bruises. That's the story. And I felt heavy when I told this story. I felt annoyed in telling this story. I developed this story in high school soon after I had been diagnosed, and I used to play water polo. And my coach would tell our team consistently that if you punch and kick people and scratch people in the water, that it's all fine as long as the ref doesn't see it. So for an angsty, emotional teenager, that fulfilled that part of my brain, but it also meant that I would get out of the pool from games with bruises up and down my arms and my legs and scratches over my back that would later turn into bruises. And my friends would then ask me, "What are you doing?" And I would just say, "Oh, I'm just playing water polo." And that's when I realized some amount of shame creeping in. It was more of this idea that I didn't ask for the attention, that the attention was just coming to me from my bruises. So the story came about because I wanted a way to say, yes, this thing is here, it's a medical thing, but it was also a way of distancing myself from it and moving on. To my surprise, the woman, after I had told her this story, kind of seemed like that was too much information to share with her. She didn't really seem to care that much, actually, and just said, "Okay, well, let's get you tied up," and led me over to the side of the room where there was 3 large posts that were kind of in the shape of an N, with a ring holding in the center of it, about a foot above my head. She looked at the consent form and she said, "Well, based on the fact that you marked down that you want a rough, beautiful, and sensual ride, here's what I'm thinking for you. I want to put a chest harness around you. I'm going to put your hands behind your back. There'll be a rope that goes from the back of your chest harness through the ring. And then I'm going to put a harness around each of your thighs, and there'll be a rope individually that goes up to the ring above you. And so the final position that you'll be in is like you're sitting in a chair in the air with your hands behind your back. How does that sound?" So never having been suspended before, I just said, yeah, great. And at that, I stripped down to my underwear and stood waiting for her. At first, she started removing the rope from her bag very slowly and methodically. She laid the rope in front of me and grabbed a longer rope, uncoiled it, walked in front of me, and started to rub it across my chest while looking at my eyes and taking deep breaths with me. I remember feeling that the rope was prickly, a little bit ticklish, but it was also smoother than I had expected. It felt like it had been treated with an oil or a wax. And I really enjoyed the sensation of it when it was tightened around my chest, when there was a bit of restriction. I also enjoyed the moments when she walked behind me and roughly took my hands behind my back and restricted my movement. It was enthralling, and I remember looking at the crowd and realizing, oh yeah, there's those 20 strangers looking at me. And that's kind of fun. So we'll just go with that. And I remember also thinking that I was anticipating happiness, essentially. She had thought of the pain thing, but to me, this was just going to be this joyful, relaxing experience that was yet to come, and I was waiting for that. So after my chest was complete, the harness around my chest, and that was tied up to the ring, my hands were behind my back, she came around my front, spread my legs open, and then started tying the harnesses around each of my thighs. And she finished my right thigh first, took the rope, and hoisted it up, so now only one foot was on the ground. She got the second rope ready on my left leg to lift up, and once again she looked at me and said, "Are you ready?" Again, not really knowing what else to think, I just said, "Yeah, sure, great, okay." And at the count of 3, she lifted the second leg up, and that's the moment that I understood the question about pain. It was searing and hot and felt unnatural. I remember looking down at my thighs and seeing the skin bulge out from around the rope and thinking, that's not natural, that shouldn't be happening right there. And in that process, I tried to move my arms so that they would relieve some of the tension, but my arms are behind my back, so I can't do that. And then I was very aware of the fact that there was a chest harness around my chest, and that was restricting my breath. So all of a sudden, the breath was hard to find. I was looking around the room. I started having thoughts thinking, I can't do this. Why are you doing this? Why did you do this again? Wait, this is not free. I feel this is restrictive. I want this to stop. I don't think I can do this. And at that moment, the woman approaches me from the front. She spreads my legs apart, grabs both of my thighs where the rope is, pushes into it so I am staring at her in the eyes, and she says, "Find your bruises." For me, in that moment, I found my bruises by visualizing what they looked like. I started thinking about how my bruises on my thighs would be purple and plum and magenta tones, that I knew that the kind of pressure that I was experiencing on my thighs would show up in a bruise the next morning. I probably wouldn't see it that night, but it would hurt, and then it would stay for about a week to a week and a half. I started thinking about how the harness on my chest would be more of a mustard color, there'd be green tones, it would be brown, it would be lighter, and it would show up that night, but it would go away faster than the bruises on my thighs. And I would see most likely the rope marks, and they would be red and they'd be bright, and they would pass within about 24 hours or so. And when I found my bruises, I could breathe again. All of a sudden, I could be in that moment and not be terrified of the pain. And I could trust this person that I was with all of a sudden because they were seeing me in a different way than I had not been seen before. They were acknowledging this part of me that I had actively tried to distance myself from before. At that point, she let me stay in that position for, I think, about 10 minutes, even though it felt like a lot longer than that for me. And I went in and out of feeling the pain and not feeling the pain, and every time I was able to breathe through it. She eventually asked me if I was ready to try another position because I was doing so well. And at that point, I was up for it. I figured it can't be worse than the initial position. And so she came around to my back, and remember, I'm sitting in a chair position in the air, and she lifted my bottom up and over my legs, and now my whole body is face down, parallel to the ground. The transition had its bumpy moments of getting there, readjusting the rope, and there was more tension. But eventually I settled into that position too, and she walked around to my feet, grabbed my feet, and pushed my body forward. And at that moment, I felt free. I was flying over the crowd, and I was just free, bruises and all. My bruises now are a memory for me. They show me the moments that I choose to be vulnerable with someone. They show me moments that I choose to open and trust to another person. And they show me that other people have the ability to see me in a new way too. And I have a new story that I tell people now. It's much shorter than my original bruise story. And it essentially just goes, well, I bruise easily because I have a bleeding disorder. But I look forward to the connections and all the different bruises that will come my way. Thank you.